Check, check. Can you hear me? Okay. Good stuff.
Say something profound. Somebody in that car.
It's a free mirror. I think I look good though.
Hey, good to see you guys. It's awesome to have another Salem show with you. It's been a while. We thought we'd give you guys a bit of a backstory and a bit of an update before taking things on to the rest of the episode. Somebody thought it'd be a great idea to start a talk show in the middle of a pandemic. And I'm not talking about John Krasinski. I try to barely even mention the guy. Talking about us. We did that, and it turned out to be harder than we thought. For that reason, production has been slow. We only just now have the second episode, but hey, 2 episodes, 1 episode a year. It's not that bad. Some people don't even have their own talk show. On the same note, though, we decided to take a short break, indefinitely, from the Salem show, in hopes of focusing on things we know we can do well. And then maybe getting back to that, maybe once studios open up again, and we can get in there and do a quality product that hopefully you enjoy. It does seem like you guys enjoyed the show, though, and we appreciate you giving us that feedback. You've been very kind, and we hope to do it again soon. In the meantime, we leave you with a very special episode. It is a long-form episode, a long-form interview with a very special guest that I've wanted to interview for over 7 years. She is a professor at Chemeketa Community College. She has been there for about 25 years, taught so many people, including myself, one of the best teachers I've ever had. I'm so excited for you guys to get to meet her and know her in some form. And with that, we leave you with our parting gift, Professor Tracy Hodgson.
Hey, this is exciting. Thanks for inviting me.
Thanks for being here. Hey, can we put her up on the... All right, perfect. Tracy, how are you doing? Thanks for being on the show. How has this crazy year been for you? I know it's been different for all of us.
It's been tough, that's for sure. It hasn't been boring though, and that's been great. Having to change right away in March to figure out what you're going to do is challenging, but I think the best teachers out there are really creative, and you really see them at their best when you have to change from one way to another and think how you can do the same thing, teach the same thing, but in a different way. And that was actually quite fun and continues to be so.
Sure.
Thing we didn't know is how our students were doing and what they had at home. Did they have the computers they needed? Did they have the Wi-Fi they needed? So that's taken a lot of kind of feeling it out, but I'd say they've taken it in stride. They don't seem to act as if they're in unusual times. And right now we're getting students that lost their senior year in high school. And by now, this is kind of great to be back into something that is closer to normal than what they experienced. And in fact, a lot of them got told in March they were just done, that their school year was over. And kind of, they've been out of school for a bit. So it's been fun to get them back in. And I think they're pretty eager and just adapting. And I like to think as a historian how everything will affect us. Is this a short-term change? Is this a long-term change? And I'll be interested to see what kind of long-term changes. Will we do more of these Zoom things? Will more of us work from home? Will there be more social isolation? I don't know. But as a historian, I find myself riveted to the news in so many ways. But one of them is about this and how we're going to change. So we're back in business. We're going to be remote for another few months.
Yeah.
It's working out. It's a lot of work. Your educators out there are working a lot harder than they used to. The ones that are doing it well, and I think all of us are doing it well. But it's good. I'm doing a lot more interacting one-on-one with my students because I feel like I just want them to know that I'm someone they can come to if they have an issue, if there's a problem. And that we see you, we hear you, we want you to learn, and that's very tiring. But I really enjoy it. It's fun to hear everyone's story, particularly at the cusp of adulthood. Everyone has an interesting plan for their lives, and it's fun to see what their plans are. I wish I could check in with them later, like I can with you, to see what happened. If they got there, or if they took a U-turn somewhere.
I remember you were always so great at multimedia in your classroom. Online, your lectures were always posted online. In addition to in class, you had handouts and artifacts. You'd come in character some days. You'd bring in reenactors. So I'm sure your students will get a lot out of this class still, even though it's online.
Sadly, my collection of presidential dolls that speak are not available to me because of COVID. They're in my office. And then in the middle of COVID, we had a water leak in our office building. So they're in some undisclosed location. I would love to have them on the screen as well, but I did bring my friend here today, and he'll tell me if I
look at
said
that. Hello,
anything wrong.
Mr. Honest Abe. Thank you. I wanted to tell folks at home, I think this is so cool. When I was about 4 or 5, my siblings are much older than me, I went to college with them for one day, and I actually went to your history class, and I got to sit in, and you were very kind. You let me sit there, and I think you even had reenactors in that day.
Special day today.
And it stuck with me. I remembered it. And then some 15-ish years later, I got to take the same class with you, and amazingly you remembered, which is incredible. It was excellent. I learned a lot. How many students do you think you've taught over the years? It must be, I can't even imagine.
I think it's probably about 15,000. I teach about 700 students a year.
Yeah.
I usually teach in the summers, and sometimes I teach extra classes. So that is a little more than maybe some of my colleagues. I don't get a lot of repeats either. I miss having people in multiple classes, which some I have the opportunity to. So that's a lot of new people I've met. I really value getting to know everyone's name and getting to know a little bit about them. So that's 15,000 people that I've met and maybe forgot.
That's amazing.
It's been a fun ride. I thought I was going to be teaching at a university and publishing books, and I got this job instead, and I have loved it. I think I'm happier here than being at a place like Willamette or another college where I wouldn't have had so many awesome students come my way. And the students really make it. They're not, very few of them come from privilege at Chemeketa, and they're really working to make their lives something special. And it's not a path that's already been opened for most of them by their parents. And that is really, really wonderful to see, and very humbling, to be honest. People are literally turning their lives around. People who know one in their family's gone to college, and they're doing it, and they're doing it in stride. And it's just an honor to see that. And I think that's been more fun to teach those kinds of students, I think, than students who knew they were going to college from the time they were little and don't really have to work very hard at it, and maybe don't even know why they're in college, to be honest. So it's been the joy of my life. I kind of accidentally got to Chemeketa, and I really enjoy it.
That is one of the cool things about Chemeketa is the smaller class sizes. I feel like you get to have those one-on-one interactions, which you mentioned you're prioritizing for online, but you were always really good about doing that in class as well, in person. I remember you always scheduled conferences for us to check in. I really appreciate it.
I really enjoy that. I mean, I don't think I would join teaching without getting to know you guys one-on-one, and have you work on a project where I get to meet you and see how your brain works. You get glimpses of that in the classroom, but you get more glimpse of one or another. Some are more quiet, and that feeds my desire to have more of an interaction with all of you. That is something I miss at another kind of college. I would having more people in multiple classes, and so I enjoy that, and I think it's very empowering for students to hear their ideas listened to and validated, and then we work on how do we make them stronger so that you can do a good job.
Well, I feel honored to have you on the show because obviously you've had a huge influence on so many people in the Salem area. It's incredible. So you've been a historian for a long time, but what started you out on that track? Did you always want to be a historian from the time you were a little kid, or what's the story?
I come from a history-loving family. We always talked about history. And I grew up on a wheat farm in Kansas. And when the wheat farm harvest was over in July, we would get in our station wagon and go in any direction in the middle of the nation. So we'd go for 2 weeks, and we almost always went to history sites. So I think I've been to every major history site in North America, and I had by the age of 18. My dad did family history. So in the winters when the farm was slower, he was writing family history books and telling stories about family history. So that really was a part of my lived experience. And, they turn it to you when you're 17 and they say, what do you want to do with your life? And so I thought, okay, what do I like? And I liked history. And I said, well, I want to do history. And they said, oh, well, there's no jobs in that. And I thought, oh, that's a bummer. They said, unless you're a teacher. And I thought, well, that's what I'll be then. I'll be a teacher. And I remember writing on my application to the state university I went to, which is the University of Kansas, I want to get my PhD and be a history professor. And that's just what I did. I'm sure very few 17-year-olds end up where they were at. But I just kept doing it, thinking, well, maybe something else will come by. I just loved it. I just loved it as an undergraduate. And then I went right into grad school in Boston. And that was 7 years to get my PhD, which is very, very hard. But then I lived in Oregon, and I knew that I finished up my dissertation in Northwest Portland, staring at Forest Park out of a window, and I wanted to stay. So when the job at Schmecada opened up, it was really exciting. And I still live in Portland, and I still drive down to Salem, but I really enjoy that. In fact, the farm girl in me likes driving through the valley and seeing the cows and seeing the crops. And I'm an urban person now, but that rural part of me really, really loves that. So I guess just always as a child, always loved history, and it hasn't changed. And I continue to really be drawn to anything history. And I would do this job for free if I didn't need the money. It's a pleasure.
I think it's safe to say you picked the right profession. It's obvious.
I don't know. My daughter's a history major now, and she's in college, and she's thinking about being a lawyer. I thought I should have done that.
Oh, yeah?
Well, you mentioned Portland.
But this is called the Salem Show.
Yes.
So it's okay.
But what I am wondering is why? Is Salem the capital?
It's a good question.
Oregon?
Americans were coming out on the Oregon Trail in the 1840s. They wanted good farmland, and clearly the Willamette Valley, all of it is good. More people were living up here in Portland and in Oregon City. Oregon City was the first capital. That was kind of where the Oregon Trail folks ended up at the end of the trail. And I believe, based on what I've seen, they could see that whole valley was going to fill up, and Salem was in the middle of it, whereas Oregon City was to the north. It had been a real developed area because Jason Lee, as any Salemite knows, had started the town with his Indian mission that started north of town, and then it came. So it is already a pretty settled area, and I think it was perceived to be more centrally located for everyone because, I mean, it is in the middle of the valley. It wasn't terribly popular to move it, and people in Oregon City and Portland kept fighting for several years in the 1850s, as it was labeled the capital when it was still a territory in 1851. Trying to get it back somewhere else. In fact, they built a first Capitol building in Salem, and then the Capitol building burned to the ground. And the rumors were that the people that wanted the Capitol somewhere else had done the burning to the ground. But in the end, Salem prevailed. Their opponents even applied to the federal government and said, didn't they make the law wrong, the territorial law that made Salem a capital? Didn't they do it wrong? And then, so you had some judges and some federal officials that agreed, but in the end, I think that every year that it continued to be the capital, people got more and more comfortable with it. So I think just its central location, to be honest. on the river for sure. I mean, most of our major rivers in Oregon are in the river, and that's not an accident. That was the easiest way to travel in the earliest years. But usually there's lots of different prizes in an early territory, and they try to divide them up because there's lots of jobs with these prizes, and it can mean the difference between your city making it or not. So at the same bill that made Salem the capital, it said that a state penitentiary should be built in Portland, which is interesting because there are no penitentiaries in Portland. In fact, that's Salem's gig now. And that the university would be built in Corvallis. So that's pretty common in a Western state, that they divide up the spoils. So, because with each of those federal and state institutions, there's going to be people with jobs, support businesses. But I think the state capitol is the most biggest plum of all. And I mean, I think that's obvious when you go to downtown Salem on a weekday. In non-COVID times, there's all those state workers there buying coffee and food and greeting cards. It really has and continues to be a real staple. But Salem in general is an institution town because it does have a lot of penitentiaries and the state hospital. And that's what has made it successful.
I was actually going to make a joke and say, well, didn't the first Capitol burn down, like the White House, you know? But
well, we had another one burn in the 1930s, and some people think that it was forces allied with the KKK, the Ku Klux Klan, that burned it down then. And that's why we have one of the most unique looking like Capitol buildings. One thing I should have mentioned about my childhood is my dad had a goal for me and my brothers and sisters. I also was a lot younger than my brothers and sisters, so my parents did this twice. His goal for me was to visit all 50 state capitals.
Oh, really?
And so every year we would go, and the thing is we had to go to the Capitol building. I had to get my picture taken on the steps. So that did force us, I think. There's a lot of bad things about that goal, but the good thing was it did force us to go in all directions, and maybe states we would have skipped otherwise. And I can tell you from that most Capitol buildings look like the US Capitol. They have the dome and they have basically the same structure. But Salem's is very 1930s look. It's you know, not Art Deco, but it kind of fits into that style. And there's no other Capitol building out there that looks even close to that. And that's because our Capitol building, which did look like the US Capitol, burned down. And then it was a federal works project to rebuild it. So that makes us an unusual, and you know, it maybe isn't the very most prettiest architecture people might think, but it's distinctive, and we should be proud of that, because Oregon, I think Oregonians like to think that we're a little bit different, a little bit like whatever everyone does, and then just a twist. And I think that shows in our Capitol building.
Well, I mean, we like the Capitol in Salem, but is there any danger of it moving now that it's not really necessary for it to be so central?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I don't think there'd have to be a very good reason to move it, and there will be so many forces to keep it. So I think Salem's good.
Okay, I can get attached.
I think so.
That's...
It's seemed to me in the recent months, it's become a real center of protests. It appears to me more protests than we're ever having. I think Salem was always changing, and it's getting to be a larger city, and it's getting to be more elements of which you would see in a city like Portland size, and that includes protests.
Well, you've already mentioned some really interesting facts about Salem that I didn't know, but I want to know, what is your favorite fact about Salem, the interesting little tidbit?
I don't think Salemites really know that a very famous American came through Salem, spoke many times, was very popular, and in fact had her first camping experience in her entire life here in Salem. This woman is Susan B. Anthony. She's a suffragette and was associated with women's rights and other rights from the 1840s to the time she passed away, I think in the 1910s. And she came here to Salem in the 1871. She had been in California with Elizabeth Cady Stanton, another well-known suffragette, and Oregon women invited her to come up here. And Elizabeth Cady Stanton didn't think she could come, but Susan B. Anthony did. And she came to Salem and she spoke at Reed's Opera House. I found there's like an ad
That is cool that you have that.
Abigail Scott Dunaway had just closed down a hat making business she had, and she was opening up a newspaper, and she would go on to be a very well-known suffrage supporter here in the nation. But this was her debut on that respect. She organized speaking gigs for Susan B. Anthony all around the region. She started in Salem, a packed house, and she went up throughout the Washington territory, and she came back and she spoke at the state fair, and it was a packed house. Abigail Scott Dunaway's family had a practice, and apparently this was common in the late 1800s, for people to have cabins on the state fair grounds. I think they were more like structures, like if you ever go to a summer camp where there's just canvas stretched over a frame. But they stayed there. And Dunaway's family, the only holiday they ever took every year was to go to the state fair, and they camped there for a week. And they just go out under the grounds every day. And Susan B. Anthony did that. She was in the Dunaway's house. Abigail Scott Dunaway had 6 children, so it was not a fun experience for anybody. She's probably squeezed on the ground there, but she did. And in fact, at some point, the entire Supreme Court of Oregon came to visit her. She felt very honored that way, and she was very well received in Salem, much more than elsewhere. So, anyone in Salem doesn't think they're progressive. That's not true. We were ahead of the times. In 1871, Susan B. Anthony came, and she liked what she saw. And that doesn't mean women got the right to vote right then, but it took a little while. Still, we were ahead a little bit of everyone else getting the right to vote in 1912. So anyway, Susan B. Anthony came. She went to Reed's Opera House. She went to the state fair. She went camping. And then once she was exhausted, she went home.
That is an incredible story. Thank you for sharing it. I didn't know any of that, and it goes to show Salem has some really important history, not just weird facts. That's so cool. Thank you for sharing. You, better than anybody, are qualified to share it with us, and we appreciate you being on the show so much. Thank you for taking time out of your schedule to do this. And
yeah, absolutely.
Thank you so much.
Have a great rest of the year. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Bye.
Stay way high.
Yes, thank you, Nathan. I am Joey, and I am on the street. And like what they say in showbiz, there's no biz like other people's biz. So I'm out here. I'm gonna ask people some pretty personal questions. Once I find somebody.